As soon as I saw the currency exchange add Uber fragments this league, I kinda knew what I wanted to do, and that was to farm Uber bosses. Typically, when people make a boss farming character in Path of Exile, it's some kind of ZHP nightmare type build that one-shots bosses, but it also gets one-shot itself. This didn't really appeal to me that much. I kinda wanted something that may not kill the bosses instantly, but would let me get as close to relaxing during the boss fight as I possibly could. This meant I needed to be able to survive most of the boss abilities while face tanking, and I also needed unconditional recovery that kinda just let me sit in puddles even if I had nothing to hit, without having to worry too much about anything going on. Now this league we got a rework of the bottom of the tree, and with that plus access to tattoos, one build in particular stood out in my mind, and that was the Blood Magic Lifestack Inquisitor that I played a few leagues ago. Now, since that last time that I played the build, they've added Transfigure gems, and while normal Firestorm and Blazing Salvo, two of the gems that I used previously, still work for this setup, the gem I wanted to explore this time around was Firestorm of Pelting. It also kind of helps that it looks pretty sick with the Celestial Firestorm MTX. Firestorm of Pelting is essentially the small meteors half of the original Firestorm gem, and it scales insanely well with reduced AoE and increased duration. It lets us get some pretty substantial boss damage even when we're almost completely focused on defensive scaling. And at the end of the day, this build ended up easily handling pretty much all Ubers in the game. I did a bunch of feared rotations with it, and it can even do super juiced tier 17 maps, even though it really isn't set up for that too well. And overall, it did pretty much everything I wanted it to without breaking the bank either. In this video, I'm going to go over some of the basics of the build. I'll do a full feared run, including a Mavened Uber Elder, and I'll show you what a super juiced tier 17 map looks like on the build. If you end up enjoying the video and you want to see more content similar to this, make sure to give the video a like, and also consider subscribing so that you can keep up to date with all of my latest videos. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. So this is a build that I played a few leagues ago. However, there have been some pretty decent changes over the last couple of leagues to things that have happened, particularly the main skill that we're going to be using, which is Firestorm of Pelting. Now, if you don't know what this build is, this is a blood magic build. It uses this keystone all the way down here. So this is blood magic. It removes all of your mana, gives you more life, and it makes it so that skills just flat cost life and they reserve life. This allows us to get some pretty easy reservation of a few skills, and it just goes straight to our life total without us having to worry about like arrogance and it reserving 200% or anything like that. It also means that we have exactly 0 mana. Now, the reason that this is relevant is we are using Infernal Mantle. The big downside of Infernal Mantle is the fact that it says 100% increased spell damage taken when on low mana. This is a huge downside. This is essentially you are dead if you get hit by pretty much anything. So typically it's really hard to make use of this chess piece. However, since we have no mana whatsoever, we can never be on low mana. So we've made use of this as well as a implicit corruption to get all the way up to like a 29, 30 level gem, depending on, how much money you've spent on the build. Now, on top of that, this is a life stack build, particularly because, well, we're blood magic, so it's one of the only things that we can realistically stack. When you combine that with Wrathpith Globe, it gives us a ton of crit, a ton of spell damage, and overall, that is the main scaler of our damage on this build. Everything else, pretty much, is invested into just casting faster so that it feels better to play the build, and scaling life. All right, so we are gonna do a full feared run. Starting off with Chayula. You can do flawless Chayulas if you want to, but realistically there's not much of a reason to spend extra on it. The extra drops aren't worth that much, but everything's going to be Maven influenced here. I'll show you all just like the basics and some tips and stuff to keep track of while you're doing these kinds of things. One big thing with doing Chayulas is that you do need to make sure that you keep up with the zone. It is very easy to get too far behind here. Killing the enemies is honestly not that big of a deal. It's just if you're kind of complacent and you don't try to make sure to keep up with the zone, Chayulas can go pretty fast. So once you finish up here, it'll of course drop all the loot for you. Most of the time there's not really anything in here. The vast majority of the time people use Chayulas for leveling up. This is essentially 0 danger. It should be basically impossible for you to die here unless you do something very, very wrong. But Chayula in general doesn't really drop very much loot. It's just so that we can use it for the feared later. Next is going to be Atziri. Atziri is actually kind of dangerous. There's a few different things that can kill you in the Atziri fight, so we're mostly going to be skipping just the clearing. I don't kill any of these mobs the vast majority of the time. I just try to get through here as quickly as possible. So I typically don't use RF on Atziri at all. This isn't a damage problem. There's not really much reason to. There's 2 things on Atziri that can kill you. One is she can high roll extremely high on her Flame Blast, and it can still kill you if you don't have a bunch of defensive layers up. And 2, you can kill yourself to Reflect very easily. Normal Atziri has 1% just all damage reflects, I guess besides Chaos. And if you get enough of these Firestorms up at the same time, you can actually kill yourself by doing too much damage. The other is that when she splits, she has a mirror form, and that mirror form has 100% damage reflection, which will kill you. So I'll go ahead and show you the mirror form and the normal form. So that Flame Blast can kill you if you don't block it. Essentially what we do here is we look for the mirror, which is there. We go to the other side and we try to kill this one. This is what I always do. You can still die, unfortunately. If anything hits that mirror clone, you're just dead. One little itty bitty tap on it is instant death, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can try to get like reduced reflected damage taken, but ultimately it's kind of hard to get for this build, so I have no idea what hit the mirror clone there, but something obviously hit it and it just instantly killed me. Nothing I can really do there. So editing ducks here. If you notice in this picture that I've put up on the screen, I actually figured out what's killing me. It is my Tempest Shield is chaining between the Atziri clones. You can see that the right side Atziri clone is hitting me, and then my Tempest Shield is hitting that clone and then chaining to the mirror clone. So if you want to survive here, you probably just turn off Tempest Shield. Yeah, you're going to lose a lot of spell block, but it's better than instantly dying in this phase every single time. And there we go. All right, so 2 sacrificial garbs. Next is going to be Uber Elder. Now, this is kind of a bit of a dangerous fight, just simply because it's pretty RNG based what the Maven decides that she's going to do. Sometimes she can just essentially do nothing, and other times she can like mirror the Shaper and do all kinds of crazy stuff. So it really just depends. Now, one big thing to know about this fight is that the only thing that's really super dangerous is going to be the Shaper doing a slam on you and taking too many balls to the face and getting really unlucky. Pretty much nothing else should be able to kill you. You always want to stand in your Frost Shield at pretty much all times, and you just kind of want to make sure that you do your best to hit a Mortal Call whenever he does his slam. If you do those 2 things, for the most part, you should be okay. You might die occasionally if you just stand in too much stuff or get hit by too many things at one time and you end up just not blocking anything. But other than that, you can pretty much stand in every single ability. The puddles don't really matter, the beams don't really matter, the extra mobs don't really matter. Just do your best to kill everything. I'll show you can survive a slam here with a Mortal Call. Does almost no damage if you pop a Mortal Call before he hits you. You can also use a Mortal Call for this Elder Slam. It doesn't always kill you, but I have been killed by it in the past, so I kind of just try not to mess around with it too much. Now, if for some reason when you do take a slam from the Shaper and you don't have a Mortal Call up, you just have to get out of his way. You just gotta Frostblink away is the best thing that you can do. But he doesn't do it that often, so you should always have it up. And we'll just go ahead and finish these guys off. The Maven is very annoying here. She's just going to be slowing and healing them and doing all kinds of very frustrating things, but it is what it is. Go ahead and finish these guys off, and we should be done. He's going to do a slam one more time. That's it. That's it for Uber Elder. Next thing on the list is going to be Cortex. Now, Uber Cortex is not a dangerous map at all. There is one thing to note about doing Uber Cortex though, in that if you're going to be using the exchange to purchase all of the fragments, you kind of do need to spend some time here and just kill some enemies. These drop a ton of gold, like an actual ridiculous amount of gold. Now, the only thing about Uber Cortex that you need to keep in mind is that depending on the mods that roll on this map, it could be more or less dangerous. It can also be slower. So in particular, you might have noticed that this map rolled 130% more monster life. When you couple that with 70% less damage, that means that these bosses and enemies are going to die pretty slow. There's also some faster attack speed, it looks like, faster attack, cast, and movement speed, which can be a little bit annoying on the final boss, but for the most part, the only time I really die in Uber Cortex is if it's like double gained as elemental damage or something like that. It's pretty much the only time that I have any issues. But I try to clear a little bit through this map just to get enough gold to be able to use the exchange, because there's not really any other source of gold when you're doing feared rotations. But beyond that, let's move to the boss. This is a relatively straightforward fight. The only thing that you really need to worry about is standing in the little puddles. They just slow you down a ton. It's not that the puddles are dangerous, it just makes it so that the boss essentially never dies because it's such a huge action speed slow. You only have to kill one of the 2 mobs on Uber to be able to progress it to the next section. It's the big guy right there, the big mech, and then there is the synthete, I don't know what this is called. The synthete masterpiece is the next one that you have to kill. You don't have to kill these other 2 guys until the in-between phase. However, interestingly enough, I actually have had the game crash on me when I leave both of these up going into the next phase. It doesn't always happen, but it does sometimes happen. You can spend this in-between time killing these 2 guys, since these things do essentially 0 damage at all. Like, almost nothing can kill you unless you have like really, really bad damage modifiers on the map. So in the next section, you just have to kill the big mech again. You can completely ignore the twisted synthete if you want to. If it's a very dangerous map, like there's some crazy map mods, you may want to kill some of the extra ones first. But now you just need to kill the synthete nightmare. Now there is one ability in this phase that can kill you, and we might see it here since this is 130% more monster life. It's when he does this big channeled ability where he does like the spinning lasers and stuff. If you stand in that slam, there is a chance that you can die. Also, on much more difficult maps where there's like lots of damage, this guy, he can do this kind of like auto attack beam ability that for some reason can one-shot you, but the rest of his abilities don't. I don't know why that is. Once you finish the rotation, you can go here to Kirak and do the Feared. So you can roll this pretty much as dangerous as you would like. I'm gonna go ahead and force like 80 or above if I can hopefully get it. Typically, I'll take anything that's like 75 quant or higher, as long as it doesn't have like absolutely insane mods. Like if there's 4 disabling mods for my build, then maybe I'll skip it. But for the most part, you can pretty much do everything except Ellie Reflect. Okay, so the game has decided that it's going to have me show basically as dangerous of a Feared as I could possibly ever roll. Negative max res, double gained, less effective auras, and less AoE. This is probably the most dangerous one I've ever ran, so when we go into this Feared, I'm not going to be using RF because I have negative max resistances. I'm going to have to be relatively careful in general and hope that I get a good order here. Otherwise, I'll probably die a few times. Oh, we got one of the worst orders. Wonderful. So one big thing is that Chayula is by far the most dangerous out of all the enemies here. And because I have a bunch of negative max res, I could die. Most of the time you don't, but I mean, actually, as you can see, we're taking actually almost no damage here still. So it should be fine. Typically, the priority is to kill the Elder first because he has a slow, which is the main thing that you want to worry about. We'll go ahead and Immortal Call the Shaper Slam. But yeah, typically the priority is kill Elder, kill Chayula, and then Shaper and everything else. But yeah, even though this was super dangerous, negative max res, a bunch of extra damage gained, I took actually almost 0 damage. Alright, so the next thing we're going to be running is going to be a juiced tier 17 map. So this is going to be a sanctuary. I rolled it to be relatively worthwhile. I've noticed that recently you can't get as high of item quantity since they changed the way the T17s work, but you can get insane amounts of currency, insane amounts of scarabs. This is relatively annoying. It's got bloodstained saw blades. It's got impale, which is pretty bad for this build because fizz damage is the most dangerous thing for it. +1 maximum endurance charge isn't too big of a deal, but they gain endurance charges when hit, so relatively dangerous, sort of annoying map. It's not like the most dangerous. We're going to be doing 20% Delirious. We will be running this with a bunch of Strongbox Scarabs. Now, I haven't ran tier 17s in a while, so I'm kind of just going off of the latest Fubgun strat. This is a slightly modified version of his tree, and yeah, so we're going to go ahead and run Ambush on here. I will run this with Searing Exarch Presence, and let's go ahead. So in general, this build is not super well suited to tier 17s, but it can still do them perfectly fine. I did run quite a bit of these when I was first running the build, just because I kind of wanted to spend some time and see how the new T17s felt, because I was making a video about, you know, people were complaining that T17s weren't possible and, you know, all that kind of thing, so I made a video about it. But in general, from what I've noticed is that the build functions perfectly fine. T17s seem quite easy now. especially with the nerfs to a bunch of the modifiers. So yeah, I mean, there's not really too many issues with running this style of content. The build doesn't move extremely fast, and it doesn't have crazy clear. Like, I'm not, you know, clearing things off screen at all times and able to hit the entire screen at once. This is more so meant to be a bossing build, so it'll be great for finishing off the bosses of tier 17s. I pretty much have no issues with any of them. But in general, this isn't going to be as fast as like Lightning Strike on a Slayer or something like that. But it can handle them, right? Pretty much no issues here. I can run almost as dangerous as I want. In the notes, there is a section specifically talking about the mods that are either not doable or extremely dangerous. In general, I kind of just take whatever on the altars. There's not a ton to worry about here. But I'll go ahead, and if any cool things happen or we get any like big explosions of currency, I'll put them in the video. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and jump to the boss. Oh, we got a raw divine word drop. Nice. Alright, so we finished up the map. Notable drops were the Enlightened card, as well as a Divine Ore, a bunch of other random little bubblegum type currency. Now, when it comes to bossing in T17s, it is heavily dependent on what the mods of the map are. Each of the independent bosses are going to have like certain abilities that are rather dangerous. Like Lycia, for example, has that one big channel ability that she can do. I don't exactly know what's going on here. There we go. Yeah, each of the different bosses have like particular abilities that end up being a little bit more dangerous than some of the other ones. It really heavily just depends. But for the most part, as long as you save your Immortal Call for whenever they do one of their big boom abilities, you should be mostly fine. I haven't really had too many issues with dying to tier 17 bosses. For the most part, I've been able to face tank them. If you get like some really super dangerous mods, you might have to be careful, but the vast majority of the time, they kind of just go like this. So some basics about the build. This is a Firestorm build, and previously it was a normal Firestorm build. However, Firestorm with Pelting has a little bit better of a ceiling if you use things like Intensify and Conk Effect. Because as you can see, when you're casting these Firestorms, they kind of just hit all over the place. However, if you stack up this Intensify, you'll notice that they all kind of go right there in the middle, yeah? And that overlaps extremely well, especially on larger bosses, like a lot of the Uber bosses are pretty large. That gets you some pretty good overlaps and some pretty good damage. So with Firestorm of Pelting, we're trying to get all the way up to that maximum 12 Firestorms that you can see at the bottom, because all of these are able to overlap. When we have everything going, all of our charges and everything up, we are able to get that 12 stacks pretty easily. So with enough investment into duration as well as cast speed, we're able to get a ton of damage out of this one ability without really having to do very much. It's essentially just some investment into cast speed through things like Spell Echo and like cast speed on all of our gear, as well as a few points into skill effect duration. We are using Assassin's Mark to help us cap crit on bosses, as well as just give us some crit multi, just the best curse that we can really use. Inquisitors can't use elemental resistant curses because it doesn't work with our Ascendancy. We do have RF. We're scaling a bunch of life recovery, and RF makes perfect sense here, gives us more damage. We are using Frost Shield. This is super useful on this build because we are scaling so much energy shield recovery. You can pretty much get up to 4 stacks of this instantly, and it doesn't inhibit your like regeneration almost at all. Like if I put another one of these down, it goes the full instantly, and we stay at full energy shield the entire time. Beyond that, I do use Frostblink of Wintry Blast for movement. This is the save on gem space. If you really wanted to, you could probably cut a couple of gems here and do like shield charge or something like that. But with all the cast speed that we scale, it's pretty fine using Wintry Blast. It's not a huge deal. We do use a Storm Brand. This is for a couple different things. It gives us Overcharge, which is at current moment shocking bosses for about 10%, which is actually pretty good. We get power charges from this, and we also do have Culling Strike on this. Just an overall good thing. You pop a couple underneath a boss while it's loading up, and it culls everything, gives it shock, and gives you power charges. Now, I am using self-cast Immortal Call If you don't want to deal with that and you're just doing general content, you can do cast when damage taken and it works perfectly fine. However, for bossing based content, it is very nice to just be able to press Immortal Call before like a Shaper Slam or something like that, because it does allow you to survive it quite well. We do have pretty good uptime on endurance charges because we are using Inexorable. This gives you a chance to gain an endurance charge when you're hit, and a block is considered a hit. We just face tank everything, meaning we're getting hit every single time by every single thing. So the uptime on this is extremely good. We pretty much always have endurance charges. So even without endurance charges, our Immortal Call is lasting 2.16 seconds because we have more duration linked to it, and because we're scaling some duration on the tree. So it lasts for a super long time, even without charges. With charges, it's like 4 seconds or something. And then lastly, if you aren't going to be using cast when damage taken, you can use Enduring Cry. Enduring Cry got changed recently, and it gives you 2% of life regen per second per 5 power, meaning you can get to like 8 to 10% of your life recovery per second, which is a ton for this build. Get some extra charges, get some extra life recovery. It's honestly pretty strong. But once again, you can just swap in cast when damage taken. Now, I do quickly want to talk about a couple of things. For clear, I did want to test out Awakened Spell Cascade, and realistically, it looks like it should be good. However, there is a problem. The way that Cascade works is that they are separate instances of the spell. So if we look at this, whenever I cast multiple of these, you'll notice that the first set ends almost immediately. That's just because Awakened Spell Cascade is causing it to cast 5 times essentially, and we can only have 12 of these. So it's not as good as it might seem, unfortunately. And on top of that, I did want to show you Normal Firestorm. Normal Firestorm is actually fine. Like, this ability is still fine. You can use it. It is not as good as Pelting. Like, it's just not as much damage. And then there is also Firestorm of Meteors. Firestorm of Meteors is not good on this setup at the very least. It doesn't even really do more damage. It actually does less damage, and it doesn't have the duration. It doesn't have like the damage over time kind of thing that the other ones do. It's really just not that great. These are both 2120, and Firestorm of Pelting does a lot of damage. This does okay damage, and Meteors does like almost no damage. Now, quickly talking about the gear, the vast majority of this gear is Essence crafted gear. We are using a couple uniques. I already talked about Infernal Mantle and Wrathpith Globe before. We are using the Darkseer. The only thing that matters here is that it has +2 to maximum life per level. The Energy Shield is secondary. It could even be mana if you wanted to. Just get one with +2 maximum life per level. This is very strong because of +2 level of all skill gems, as well as that Malediction on Blind. Beyond that, this is all just mostly Essence crafted gear. You get a Fractured Suffix, you roll Chaos Resist Essences until you get a tier 1 resist, and then you use Eldritch Currency to do the prefixes. I've included notes on how to craft everything that'll be down in the description. Some other interesting tech that this build uses is the Timeless Jewel here, this Militant Faith. We are using a cloistered setup here. It makes us immune to elemental ailments while on consecrated ground. Later on in the PoB section, I'll tell you how to get a jewel like this. This is just super useful because it does allow us to use Inner Conviction, and we get free elemental ailment immunity pretty much always, since we are an Inquisitor, and Inquisitors can always have consecrated ground underneath them. And then one other interesting piece of tech we're using is going to be this Red Nightmare here. Now, the tree has actually been shifted a little bit, but if you take tattoos and you put fire resistance on all of these strength tattoos, including there's actually a fire resistance node here that's in the circle, this jewel gives you a ton of block chance. 78 block. So 78 attack block, 78 spell block. Between this, like a few block nodes here and there, like we've got some block nodes here, and then some block tattoos, which these have been pretty expensive, but you only need a handful of them. We're able to get max block, max spell block, and that is not with glancing blows. This is pure block. But we do have immutable force here. This, as long as it's above 961%, it will reduce the duration of a stun to under 1 server tick, which still interrupts your casting, but you basically don't feel it most of the time. I'm personally using a Watcher's Eye with life recovery rate as well as Zealotry. This is just damage, and it's not that much recovery rate. I don't use this in the lower end version of the PoB that doesn't have the Delve Rings, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then lastly, I do have an Impossible Escape on Blood Magic. If this gets expensive, you can just drop a couple of points and simply just take these nodes and anoint Inexorable. It's not necessary, it just saves you a couple of points, which is pretty nice, allows you to get Golem's Blood. pretty much it for the gear, besides one big thing, which are these delve rings. I've included extensive notes on how to craft these in essentially every way. You can either do fractured ones, or you can do Recombinator version that doesn't require fractured ones. These rings are one of the few things on this build that could get absurdly expensive. I would say that you don't need these rings. You can simply come down to the bottom of the tree and take these points here, Champion of the Cause, as well as the Life Reservation Efficiency of Skills Mastery. Taking those two things does make the build function perfectly fine, so you don't need these rings. However, they are a pretty good upgrade if you are able to get them. If you have any other questions about the rest of the gear, it's pretty much all explained how to make it in the notes. In the description of the video, there is going to be a link to these notes. It has essentially everything that you could ever want. It's got all of the information about the build, talking about the path of building. It talks about bossing, notes on pretty much every single Uber boss, how to deal with them. It talks about like what the build is good for, what it's not good for, how the build survives, how it does damage, all the gear that it uses. It also gives you like a list of how to craft every single piece of gear with like step-by-step instructions. It's got pretty much everything. There's a ton of stuff in these notes that you can find. Should be quite useful in general to you. On the other hand, we have the POB here. Now, when you do load up the POB, there is going to be 3 particular loadouts here. This is kind of a new feature that POB has, where you can load a tree set, a skill set, an item set, and a configuration set. So there's going to be 3 here. There's going to be my character. This is how the character that you saw in this video is set up. There's going to be one that has no delve rings. That is, of course, these rings right here that have like the life reservation efficiency on them. So I have included a tree just in case you can't get a hold of delve rings on how to set that up. It's still doing most of the same damage, most of the same survivability. It's not as good, of course, but if for some reason you can't get the delve rings, it does exist. And then there is, of course, a very high-end POB that is just significantly better than even my character. It's using like a double corrupted infernal mantle. All of the gear is mostly perfect. It's using misted reflected ring and amulet and a Calandra's touch and all this kind of good stuff. So this is the super duper high end for the 5 people out there who really like throwing mirrors at builds. It's in here, so you can choose between all of these different loadouts here. Everything from the skills to the items to the configuration is set up for each individual character. Notably, at the bottom here, there is going to be trees that are made for the no delve rings as well as my character that'll show you what points to go from like 97 all the way up to 100. This is a full end game character. It's not meant to be as like a new player character or a leveling character, so I've only included 97 up. You should be able to get to level 97 if you're playing a build like this. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is going to be this timeless jewel. This timeless jewel is a little complicated. There's a lot of moving parts here to be able to find what you're looking for, but essentially is you're trying to find a militant faith, you're trying to find it under Dominus, and you're trying to find it in the Eternal Youth slot here. You're going to want to click filter nodes. Then what you're going to want to do here is you're going to want to search for nodes. You're going to hit cloistered here. Then you're going to hit search for nodes, and you're going to hit total devotion. Those 2 need to be in the desired node list. Now, in general, when it comes to these devotion modifiers, anything that has elemental resistances, or let alone elemental resistance and area damage or elemental damage, is going to be essentially unobtainable within a couple hours of this video going live. They're already expensive now, so do keep that in mind. So I highly suggest that if you have a lot of money to spend, just go for elemental resistance if you can get it. And if you don't have a lot of money to spend, go for literally anything on both of these. Now, what you're also going to want to do is you're going to want to come up here to the top left here, and you're going to want to add any nodes that you want to protect. In this particular circumstance, we want to protect Sanctuary, we want to protect Sanctity, and we want to protect Combat Stamina, because the node that we are trying to get cloistered on is Expertise. So whenever we do the search here, we are going to end up with ones that have the final node, which is Expertise, as the immune to elemental ailments while on consecrated ground, or cloistered. So all of these are going to have it. And you'll notice that on the right here, it shows 150 devotion. There are a bunch of these that have 150 devotion, right? Like all of these are viable. All of them will work for this build with this exact setup. What you can do is you can hit this copy trade URL and you can paste that in. And if you go here, and as you can see, even in just the first set here with these first numbers, there's a ton of these that exist. And then you would go back into the POB, you would do copy next trade URL, you'd go back to the window, do it again, and there's 27 more of these. So at any time, there's probably a few hundred of these that exist that will work. The price of these will go up, but it is what it is. Now, there are quite a few different ones of these that will work. For this particular setup, I have it set to be on Expertise. However, you can change this. You can drop it on expertise and go to ancestral knowledge. You can also get it on like sanctity, you can get it on combat stamina. At absolute worst case, you can also get it down here. I think this is called dynamo, but this is an additional point that you'll have to put in. And then there's like downsides to losing combat stamina or sanctity as well. You would go back to find timeless jewel. You would go ahead and block the ones that you want here. So we are going to want this on ancestral knowledge this time, and then we'll go ahead and search again, and it's going to be a different list. And if we copy this trade URL and pull it up, it is a completely different list, and it looks like there's 30 here, and then you would do next trade URL, and then there is roughly about 34 there. So a bunch of these do exist. You can do it on a bunch of different nodes. If you try to go for ones that are going to have like elemental resistances and stuff, it will be more expensive though. So the notes are going to be down in the description. They will be updated over time. You can always just go check the link for it. It'll have the most up-to-date PoBs, all the most up-to-date information, so that I don't have to go across the whole bunch of videos and try to change stuff. It's all just located in this one website with everything in it. If you have questions or just want to kind of discuss the build in general, there will be a channel on my Discord as well that is dedicated to this particular build. You can find it in the Ducks build section of my Discord. Just make sure to keep discussion about the build away from the general channels, as I don't want to just flood all of my normal like long-term community members there with an infinite amount of questions. Try to keep it into the channel if you can. And remember boys, if you enjoy this content, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest videos, and stay safe out there in Rayclast. And I'll see you guys in the next video.